It was one of those quiet summer nights when the world feels too still, as though holding its breath. A warm breeze drifted through the open window, stirring the thin curtains and carrying with it the faint smell of flowers from the garden outside. The silence was almost soothing, wrapping me in a comfort I hadn't felt for a long time. I had spent the entire day at my friend Daniel's countryside house, helping him fix up old shelves, repaint a few walls, and tend to the sprawling garden that had been left wild for years. By the time the sun went down, I was exhausted. My body ached pleasantly, and all I wanted was to collapse into the guest room bed Daniel had prepared for me. That house held a strange familiarity, as though it belonged to another lifetime of mine. The creak of the wooden floors, the faint scent of dust and lavender, the distant tick of a grandfather clock, all of it wove together into a nostalgic lullaby. I let it carry me into sleep, deep and dreamless. But sometime in the night, something shifted. At first, it was subtle, the faint sensation of movement in the room, like the whisper of a shadow slipping past. My eyes blinked open groggily, caught between sleep and waking. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, painting long, crooked shapes across the wooden floor. For a moment, I told myself it was nothing. Just the house settling, or my imagination clinging to dreams. Then I heard it. The slow, deliberate creak of the door as it eased open. My heart skipped, then quickened. I told myself it had to be Daniel, maybe he was checking in, making sure I was comfortable. Still, I kept my eyes closed, breathing evenly, pretending to sleep. Some strange part of me wanted to see what would happen if I stayed still, if I let the moment unfold. Footsteps padded across the floorboards, soft but purposeful. The air shifted, cooler, as if someone had brought the night inside with them. I felt the presence draw nearer, standing just beside the bed. My pulse thudded in my chest, a drumbeat against the silence. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, or if someone was truly there. But then, I felt it. A brush of movement against the blanket. A hand, or something like it, ghosting close enough to stir the hairs on my arm. And I knew I wasn't alone. The moment stretched, heavy and suffocating, as though time itself had frozen inside the four walls of the room. I kept my eyes closed, but every nerve in my body was awake, straining to make sense of the presence beside me. Whoever, or whatever, it was, they stood so close I could feel the weight of their silence pressing down on me. The hand, or the imagined impression of one, hovered near the edge of the blanket, brushing against the fabric so lightly it could have been mistaken for a draft. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't the wind. This was intentional. I wanted to turn over, to open my eyes and confront the intruder, but fear pinned me to the mattress. My mind raced through explanations. Could it be Daniel, restless in the night? But why wouldn't he just speak my name? Why move with such quiet deliberation, as if afraid of being discovered? The footsteps shifted slightly, the wooden floor groaning faintly beneath their weight. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, each throb louder than the last. Then, without warning, the figure sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under the weight, pulling me subtly toward them. A cold shiver swept through me. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to wake me, they were simply watching. The thought clawed at my nerves, making my skin prickle. I struggled to keep my breathing even, to maintain the illusion of sleep, though panic gnawed at me from the inside. And then came something worse, the faintest warmth near my ear, like breath carried on the thinnest whisper of air. I couldn't tell if the figure was leaning close, or if my mind was playing cruel tricks. Still, I felt the skin on my neck tighten, goosebumps rising in response to the phantom nearness. I thought I heard the soft intake of a breath, the sound of lungs filling in quiet restraint. Whoever was beside me was alive. Real. My throat burned with the urge to speak, to shout, to break the suffocating silence, but I couldn't. The fear had locked me in place. My body obeyed the game I had started, frozen in the pretense of sleep. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, the figure shifted again. The pressure on the mattress lightened. The air grew colder, emptier. Footsteps moved away from the bed, slow but steady. The door creaked once more. And I was left with the chilling certainty that someone had been there, studying me in the dark. The silence that followed was worse than the intrusion itself. I lay frozen in bed, my ears straining against the emptiness, searching for the faintest trace of footsteps in the hall. Nothing. The house had gone completely still, as though it too held its breath in anticipation. I wanted to convince myself I had dreamt it. Exhaustion could play tricks, shadows moving where there were none, phantom sounds echoing from a restless mind. But the weight on the mattress, the deliberate creak of the door, those had been real. Too real. Minutes crawled by like hours. The darkness pressed heavier with every second, making me feel trapped, swallowed by a room that no longer felt safe. My pulse refused to slow, and I found myself listening for the sound of Daniel moving about in the next room, some sign that he was awake too. But the house remained mute. Finally, unable to stand it, I opened my eyes. Moonlight spilled weakly across the room, silver shadows stretching from the window to the far wall. Everything was as it should be, the chair by the desk, the small lamp, the cracked dresser. Normal. Ordinary. But the air felt wrong, charged, as if it still carried the presence of whoever had sat beside me. I turned my gaze toward the doorway. The door was open wider than I remembered, swinging just slightly with the breeze. The narrow gap revealed a strip of darkness beyond, thick and impenetrable. It was impossible to tell if anyone lingered there, watching. My throat tightened. Should I call out to Daniel? Wake him, tell him what I thought I'd seen. But what would I even say? That someone had slipped into my room in the middle of the night to sit quietly by my bed? It sounded absurd, almost childish. Still, my skin tingled with the memory of unseen eyes, and I knew deep down this wasn't just in my head. Summoning courage, I sat up slowly, the bed frame groaning softly. The sound seemed deafening in the silence. My eyes stayed locked on the door, half expecting a figure to emerge from the shadows. Nothing moved. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, feet brushing the cool floorboards. The house felt colder than it had earlier, as though the night air had seeped into its bones. I rose to my feet, heart hammering. And with a shaky breath, I stepped toward the hallway. The hallway yawned before me, a tunnel of darkness framed by crooked beams and faded wallpaper. The wooden floor beneath my bare feet groaned with each tentative step, the sound magnified in the silence until it seemed impossible that anyone in the house could remain asleep. I paused at the threshold, straining to listen. At first there was nothing but the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. Then, faintly, I thought I heard it, something like a shuffle, the soft drag of movement farther down the hall. My skin prickled, my breath quickening. Daniel? My voice was barely above a whisper, cracked and uncertain. The word dissolved into the still air, unanswered. I pressed forward. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, its shadows swallowing the light of the moon that spilled faintly from my room. Doors lined either side, closed, silent, watching. I could feel the weight of them, as though each might conceal someone standing just beyond, waiting. Halfway down, I stopped. One of the doors, the one leading to the old study, was ajar. Just an inch, but enough for a thin line of darkness to bleed into the hall. I knew we hadn't gone in there earlier. Daniel had mentioned the study was hardly ever used, full of dust and old boxes. My chest tightened. I approached, pulse hammering, and laid my fingers lightly on the edge of the door. The wood felt strangely cool, almost damp. For a moment, I imagined pushing it open, confronting whatever waited on the other side. But a sudden sound froze me in place. Breathing. Soft, steady, just beyond the gap. The realization struck like ice water, and I jerked my hand back. My mind raced. Was it Daniel? Had he been awake all along, watching me from the study? Or was it something else, something that didn't belong in this house? I stumbled a step back, the floor creaking beneath me. The sound in the study ceased instantly, as though whoever, or whatever, was inside had heard me. The silence that followed was suffocating, charged with a terrible anticipation. I wanted to run, to slam my door shut and hide beneath the blankets. But some deeper, unexplainable pull urged me forward, as though the house itself demanded I keep moving. I took a breath, braced myself, and pushed the study door open. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a darkness thicker than the hall. The faint spill of moonlight from behind me stretched only a few feet into the room before dissolving into shadow. The air was heavy, stale, as if the room had been sealed for years. Yet beneath the dust and disuse, there was something else, an undercurrent of cold, sharp and unnatural, that raised goosebumps across my arms. I hesitated at the threshold. The study was supposed to be lifeless, nothing but forgotten furniture and stacks of books. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew it wasn't empty. The atmosphere clung to me, suffocating, humming with a presence I couldn't see. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I crossed into the gloom. My eyes strained to adjust, picking out shapes, the outline of a tall bookshelf against the wall, a desk covered in papers yellowed with age, and in the far corner, a high-backed chair draped with a sheet. Something was wrong. The dust across the floor was disturbed, faint trails where someone had walked recently. The papers on the desk weren't layered in cobwebs as Daniel had said, they were scattered, as though rifled through. And on the chair, the sheet sagged oddly, as if something, or someone, had been sitting there not long ago. My chest tightened. I forced myself to move closer, each step echoing in the silence. The air grew colder the deeper I went, the kind of chill that seeped into bone. Then came the sound again. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, rising and falling somewhere in the dark. My throat went dry. It wasn't behind me, it was here, in the study. I froze, straining to pinpoint it. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Not the rasp of old pipes or the creak of the house, but the quiet rhythm of lungs drawing air. Daniel? My voice cracked, trembling. No answer. The breathing stopped. Silence swallowed the room whole, so profound it roared in my ears. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to slam the door and never look back. But some stubborn, reckless part of me edged forward anyway, toward the desk, toward the chair in the corner. My hand reached for the sheet. My fingers brushed the fabric, cold and stiff beneath my touch. I hesitated, pulse thundering, and then the sheet moved. The fabric stirred beneath my hand, shifting as if something had slipped away from underneath it. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the uneven floorboards. The sheet slumped slowly to the side, sagging against the chair's arm. For a split second, I braced myself to see someone staring back at me. But the chair was empty. Only shadows clung to the fabric as it crumpled, revealing nothing but the hollow shape of wood beneath. My chest heaved, breath ragged. Had I imagined it? No, the movement had been real. I could still feel the faint tug, the fabric pulling against my fingers before falling limp. The room was colder now. My skin prickled, the hair rising on the back of my neck. The silence was no longer neutral, it was watching me, listening, poised. I turned toward the desk, hoping for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. Papers lay scattered across its surface, curling at the edges, some marked with faint stains that looked too dark to be ink. One sheet in particular caught my eye, a half-written letter, the words smudged, the last line breaking off mid-sentence as though the writer had been interrupted. Behind me, the floor creaked. I spun, heart lurching into my throat. Nothing. Just the empty space between the bookshelf and the chair, shadows pooling thick as tar. But I knew what I'd heard. The weight of someone's step. The air shifted again, cooler, closer. It pressed against my skin, brushing past like a breath, leaving a trail of gooseflesh in its wake. My body screamed to run, but my legs refused to obey, rooted to the spot. The grandfather clock in the living room chimed faintly, each toll vibrating through the walls. With every strike, the room seemed to contract, the shadows deepening, the silence thickening. Then, from the farthest corner of the study, came the sound I had been dreading. A whisper. Low, drawn out, impossible to understand, yet unmistakably human. My blood ran cold. The voice was close, closer than it should have been, but when I peered into the corner, there was nothing there. Only the suggestion of a figure, darker than the dark, standing impossibly still. I blinked. And it was gone. The whisper lingered in my ears long after it had faded, looping in my mind like an echo that refused to die. I stood rigid in the center of the study, my pulse thundering so violently I thought it might tear free of my chest. Who's there? My voice was barely a rasp, fragile and useless against the oppressive silence. No answer came. But the air shifted again, heavier this time, thick with a presence that pressed against my skin like invisible hands. I staggered back, my shoulder colliding with the desk, scattering papers to the floor. The whisper returned. Not from the corner this time, but closer. Right beside my ear. I jolted, swinging around. Nothing. Just the empty room, its shadows too deep, its silence too deliberate. Something brushed past my leg, light, fleeting, yet undeniable. My breath caught, and I nearly collapsed. Instinct finally broke through reason, and I turned, running for the door. My feet slapped the floorboards, the sound echoing like gunshots in the stillness. The hallway greeted me with darkness, deeper than before, the moonlight from my room swallowed as if the house itself wanted to keep me. I stumbled toward the faint glow, heart hammering, every nerve screaming at me to move faster. Behind me, the study door creaked slowly shut, though I hadn't touched it. I reached the guest room and slammed the door, twisting the lock with trembling hands. My back pressed hard against the wood, as though I could keep whatever it was from following. The silence returned, broken only by my ragged breaths. But the sense of being watched never left. I crawled back into bed, pulling the blanket over myself like a fragile shield. The air in the room felt charged, the shadows too dense, but I couldn't bring myself to move again. My eyes fixed on the door, waiting for it to rattle, to burst open, for something impossible to pour through. It never did. Somehow, exhaustion dragged me into uneasy sleep, though my dreams were filled with whispers and unseen eyes. When morning came, sunlight spilling across the floor, the house seemed ordinary again. No whispers. No presence. No proof. But when I glanced toward the study from the hallway, its doors stood wide open. And on the desk, laid neatly atop the scattered papers, was a single sheet of fresh, white paper. On it, written in an unfamiliar hand, was my name.